This is when we go live, the poster should be there for a few seconds.
And we're live now.
Yeah.
I think we can start in a minute. And I think we can start.
We are starting?
Yes.
I think we should at sharp 8 o'clock. I think we
Yeah,
can start.
let's start. May I start?
Okay.
Hi, Neha.
Ishan, if you can just mute everyone and yeah. Okay. Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to invite all of you and welcome all of you to the 18th Dr. Asghar Engineer Memorial Lecture. The title of the lecture today is Majoritarian Politics, How the Indian Right is Reshaping Democracy. I'm very pleased to say that we have a very eminent panel today. We have Professor Zoya Hasan, who will be the speaker, who will be delivering the lecture, and we have Professor Tanika Sarkar, who will be chairing the session. Without further ado, I would like to call upon Professor Ram Punyani, Dr. Ram Punyani, to please speak a few words about the center, welcome everyone, and speak a few words about these memorial lectures that are taking place. Ram,
Ram, you are mute.
please unmute. Ram, please unmute yourself.
I have unmuted myself. Good evening, friends. It's a real pleasure for me to welcome Professor Zoya Hasan and Professor Tanika Sarkar and all other friends who are attending this lecture, Asghar Engineer Memorial Lecture. Before I pass it on to our senior friend Vinod Mubai, I will just like to share a bit about our center and our Asghar Engineer Memorial Lectures, which have been going on for quite some time. Now, the center, of course, Dr. Asghar Engineers, apart from multiple contributions, one of the things was to lay the foundation of this center, Center for Study of Society and Secularism. Actually, he was involved with this anti-communal work earlier also. And with the formation of this center, our work became quite formal. And I had particularly been fortunate to be associated with the center right from the beginning. So apart from chronicling communal violence work, Dr. Engineer, because of his own eminence and being known everywhere, he was invited for lectures, seminars, and workshops all over. In due course, he did start the secular perspective, which fortnightly gave the perspective on the issues related to communalism, secularism, minority rights, etc. And later on, our center also undertook training of the young scholars, young people, in the form of one-day workshop, two-day workshop, and standing up to 7-day workshop. Later on, of course, we did target for training of trainers. The whole idea was that people get full exposure, full knowledge about the issues related to things which are a danger to our democracy, particularly the deeper values of secularism and how our country must adopt those in a serious form. So that was the whole idea of training for trainers programs, which we undertook for quite some time. Now, after demise of Dr. Engineer, because of various reasons, we have not been able to undertake these training workshops. But we did begin two major initiatives. One was the starting of peace centers in different towns and cities. They are not too much in number compared to the needs of the country. I think Irfan and Neha will tell us they are close to 7 in the country in different parts. And these centers are trying to promote the secular values, the values of pluralism and amity through cultural programs and through other local initiatives which they take. Now, Asghar Engineer Memorial Lecture was a logical outcome of our tribute to our founder, not only founder, He was more than a founder to us, like I can say, closest friend, mentor, and one who laid the very great outlines of communicating about these issues. So this Asghar Ali Engineer Memorial Lectures have I must thank here Irfan for taking all the initiative in trying to locate best of the scholars, selecting best of the topics, and carrying them on. And I'm sure in due course, the lectures which have been delivered, they are not only very popular, they have been picked up very well. And in due course, I'm sure that we should be able to bring out volumes dedicated to Dr. Engineer himself, which will give a good reflection of analysis of the society through which we are passing. So with these words, I pass it on to Neha or Vinod Mubai to introduce Dr. Engineer, our dear friend.
Yeah. Thank you, Ram. Dr. Ram Punyani, I forgot to introduce. Ram Punyani doesn't need any introduction, but yes, it's my humble duty to introduce him. Dr. Ram Punyani is currently the chairperson of Center for Study of Society and Secularism, very renowned author. He is everywhere on YouTube and social media. And of course, he is a very well-known social activist. So thank you, Ram. And now, before we proceed with today's lecture, it is very saddening, very, very disturbing what is happening in Jammu and Kashmir, where civilians, innocent civilians are being targeted. They are they're being killed, and we condemn violence in any form, no matter who are the perpetrators and who are the victims. So it is equally important that we condemn the violence that is happening in Jammu and Kashmir. And I think we should observe a minute of silence. Before that, I would like to just read out their names. And deepest condolences, and our heart goes out to their families. So today, there are 7 names, martyrs. Supinder Kaur, who was a principal of a school, then Deepak Chand, who was her colleague, a teacher. Then we know about the famous businessman and chemist Pandit M.L. Bindru, Virendra Paswan, who was a street vendor from Bihar, Mohammad Shafi Lone, who was a transporter. Then we had Majid Ahmad Gojri and Mohammad Shafi Dar, who were accused to be police informers. And these 7 deaths have been very, very tragic, and we condemn this violence. And can we please observe a minute's silence before we proceed to the lecture? Thank you. Thank you. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Vinod Mubai. Vinod Mubai is a very, very long-term associate of Dr. Asghar Ali Engineer, so it's only fair that he gets to speak a few words about Dr. Engineer. Vinod Mubai was a former nuclear scientist in the US, and he is joining us from New York today in spite of the different time zones, so we are very grateful to him for that. He is also the editor of Insaf Bulletin, which covers social issues. He is patron of CSSS, and he also heads the Dr. Asghar Ali Engineer Memorial Memorial Activities Advisory Committee, which is very active in deciding about these lectures. So, Vinod Mubai, please, can we have you speak a few words about Dr. Engineer?
Mute. Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Neha. Good evening to those in India, and good morning to the few in North America who may be joining. At this very troubling moment in the history of India, our thoughts naturally turn to the fighter for human rights, secularism, and social justice, Dr. Asghar Ali Engineer, in whose memory this lecture series with talks by distinguished scholars has been organized. I first met Asghar Bhai in 1969 when I came to Bombay to work in the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. a firm comradeship developed on the basis of our shared passions for the next 40 plus years until he unfortunately passed. And that continued even after I had gone back to the US uh, for work in the late 70s. Now, when I first met him, he was an engineer in the Bombay Municipal Corporation. And what is often not appreciated is that he brought a passion for data and truth in his work and writings when he became a full-time activist and analyst of the communal issues plaguing Indian society. His painstaking studies of communal riots established the political motives underlying this phenomena. The other feature I would like to briefly mention is his firm belief that democratic rights like charity should begin at home, and explains his constant struggle against the undemocratic rule and autocratic rule of the Sayyid over his own Dawoodi Bohra community, for which he had to pay a heavy price in terms of physical attacks over the years on his person and harassment. But that did not deter him, as his entire life amply demonstrated. He had distinguished awards: Communal Harmony Award, the Right to Livelihood Award, also known as the alternate Nobel Prize, and his work was generally recognized all over India, all over South Asia and Southeast Asia and the world, as his voluminous writings are so well known all over wherever people are interested in social justice. Now, I would just like to finish by two lines from the famous poet Faiz that to me exemplify his entire life, when he says, हाँ तलखी ये अयाम अभी और बढ़ेगी, हाँ अहले सितम मशके सितम करते रहेंगे, मंजूर ये तलखी ये सितम हमको गवारा, दम है तो मुदावा-ए आलम करते रहेंगे. Which basically, if I translate for those who don't know Urdu, is that the poisons of the age will grow and tyrants will continue their tyranny. I accept that these tyrants and these poisons are there, but as long as I have life, I will continue trying to make it a better world. So that, in a nutshell, to me, is how I viewed Asghar Bhai for the 46 years that we were together, almost every week, if not every day at times when he would come to America and stay with me. I would always remember him with that warmth. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Vinod Bhaiji. You have remembered Dr. Asghar very beautifully and given us a glimpse of the person he was. Thank you so much. Now I would request Professor Nasreen Fazlboy, who taught at the Department of Sociology in Mumbai University. She is also associated with CWS in a number of ways and also a social activist. May I request her to please introduce today's eminent speaker and the chair.
Yes. Thank you, Neha. It's an honor and privilege to be part of the Asghar Ali Memorial Meeting and to introduce the two eminent scholars today who will be conducting the meeting. I have to be brief, but I will try to bring out the main focus of their concerns, which are issues which are very topical today. Professor Zoya Hasan is Professor Emerita and former Dean of the School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Among other positions, she was also founder director of the Center for Women's Studies at JNU and the Center for the Study of Discrimination and Exclusion of the School of Social Sciences in JNU. Dr. Hasan has also held visiting appointments at universities abroad, National University of Singapore, University of Zurich, University of Edinburgh, and fellowships at the University of Sussex, Rockefeller Center, Bellagio, Maison de Sciences de l'Homme, Paris, and the Center for Modern Oriental Studies, Berlin. She was a member of the National Commission for Minorities in 2006 to 2009, the National Integration Council in India, these are Central Advisory Board of Education, and the National Book Trust. So from this, we can see that Dr. Hasan's main areas of concerns have been on issues of equity, social justice, democracy, development, minorities. All these concerns are particularly relevant to India of today, and the effort in her work, as I know it, has been to bring out the ground level realities, especially in issues that affect marginalized sections like caste, women, especially minority women. She has also done extensive policy work pertaining to higher education and minorities, worked on a plan of action for implementation of the Sarkar report, and also chairperson of several groups concerned with empowering minorities. We can see all these concerns in her books, reflected in her books. She's the author, editor of 18 books, including most recently, Congress After Indira, Policy, Power, Political Change, 1984 to 2009. Politics of Inclusion, Caste, Minority, Affirmative Action, Agitation to Legislation, Negotiating Equity and Justice in India. The forthcoming book titled Ideology and Organization in Indian Politics, Rising Polarization and the Decline of the Congress Party, 2009 to 2019, will be published by Oxford University Press in March 2022. Professor Tanika Sarkar, who will be chairing this session, is one of the most prominent feminist historians in India. She's a former chair of modern history at the Center of Historical Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. She has also taught at St. Stephen's College, Delhi, and at the universities of Yale, Chicago, Witwatersrand, and Göttingen. She was also visiting fellow at Trinity College, Cambridge. Professor Sarkar's work focuses on gender in the context of larger questions, such as the intersection of religion and politics in both colonial and post-colonial South Asia, and specifically in India on the issues of women, nationhood, religion, and Hindu right. Over the last 2 decades, her work has investigated the rise of Hindutva and how it connects to the cultural politics of everyday life. In her work, she has raised questions regarding women's role in right-wing politics, the implications of this for what is meant by feminist politics today, and how these right-wing strategies and tactics compare with those developed by radical feminist groups. Dr. Sarkar has also been a member of various fact-finding commissions, Khurja, Nizamuddin riots of late. Professor Sarkar has authored several books, including Rebels, Wives, Saints, Designing Selves and Nations in Colonial Times, Hindu Wife, Hindu Nation, and her forthcoming book, which is set to launch in November 2021, is entitled Hindu Nationalism Today. I'd like to end this brief introduction of both these scholars by also mentioning 2 points. One, that their long career as teachers has meant that their work could reach out to the younger generation, something that is really so much needed today. 2, that they also write in the public domain. In this sense, we can say that they are public intellectuals, concerned not only with producing strong academic work, but also work that is accessible to people in general. Again, something that is very much needed today, especially in the areas in which they have been working. So with this, I can hand over back to Neha, who can proceed now.
Yes, I would really request Professor Zoya Hasan to please begin her lecture. I don't think anyone can wait any longer to hear her. So please, Professor Zoya Hasan, all over to you now.
Good evening to everyone. Professor Tanika Sarkar, Mr. Irfan Engineer, colleagues and friends. It is a singular honor to give a lecture in memory of Asghar Ali Engineer, a great reformer, a progressive thinker, and a relentless crusader for communal harmony and social peace. Engineer Sahab fought bravely for social reform and particularly for the rights of Muslim women, and devoted his life to uphold the constitutional principles of secularism and democracy. His ideas and writings, as has been noted, are extremely relevant today, as both secularism and democracy are under grave threat, which is the subject of my lecture this evening, which is titled Majoritarian Politics, How the Indian Right is Reshaping Democracy. India is a thriving democracy when it comes to elections and peaceful transition in power, but a diminishing democracy when it comes to political freedoms. The regime loudly proclaims its democratic credentials based on its numeric majority in parliament, but this is limited to electoral politics. The assumption of power at the center by a right-wing party in 2014 is the most important political development since independence. This has produced an ideological and institutional shift in governance and politics, especially manifest after 2019. The checks and balances of constitutional government have been weakened, freedom of expression has been curtailed, democratic deliberation has been virtually bypassed, major public institutions don't function autonomously, and as we see almost every day, the government has very little patience for popular protests. This government is both communal and authoritarian. These overlapping trends have contributed to an inner corrosion of the democratic system, even though there is no rejection of democracy. In fact, there's a celebration of India as, within quotes, a mother of all democracies. However, the overall objective is to create an authoritarian state with only a token opposition, either at the electoral or legislative forums. Now, this has had catastrophic effects on the opposition as well. It has eaten into the support for centrist parties while dealing a knockout blow to the left and center-left forces. These trends are not just alarming, but also seem to be more durable than the episodic excesses that marked the emergency of the mid-1970s. Unless challenged, they are likely to have enduring consequences for our democracy. Until recently, democracy in India was doing rather well. But today, there is a growing concern that something has gone wrong with the democratic project. Now, the details of these assessments may vary, but it seems the dominance of Hindu nationalists and the manner in which they have ruled in the past 7 years has given rise to claims that India's democracy has been diluted. Policies pursued by the government and the strategies of mobilization and polarization carried out by Hindu nationalists from 2014 onwards bears significant responsibility for the problems facing India's democracy, and the shifts in the functioning of democratic institutions appear to be in line with the efforts to build a Hindu state. For this reason, I think an examination of the current moment must be the starting point of analysis. This lecture tries to make sense of these far-reaching changes through an analysis of democracy's trajectory after the election of the BJP government. It attempts to understand the shift from pluralism that seeks to accommodate diversity to majoritarianism, which seeks to limit pluralism and marginalize and ignore the minorities. This shift has been advanced by the intersection of majoritarianism and authoritarianism under BJP rule. These two processes, though separate, currently feed on each other to abate democratic politics. The key to the shift is the production of majoritarianism by means of authoritarian rule, as Arjun Appadurai has argued. Authoritarianism is both the means and the end, thus creating a vicious cycle between provocative events and decisions and political outcomes through a blend of majoritarianism and authoritarianism. It is this intersection and its impact on state institutions and democratic politics on which I wish to focus. So to start with majoritarianism, the decisive victory of BJP in 2019 reinforced the right-wing trajectory India had embarked upon in 2014. The party's top leadership interpreted the verdict as a signal to establish a Hindu state, which was the declared objective of the RSS on its founding in 1925. This project has worked via a process of consolidation of Hindu dominance through authoritarian means and constant fear and stereotyping of the other. This has served to polarize the electorate by creating a permissive climate which has enabled a politics of division to hold sway. This change did not start with the BJP's rise to power. What is novel, however, is its overall vision of India as a Hindu nation. That vision has driven a public discourse in which minorities, particularly the Muslims, are openly vilified and has encouraged tolerance of extra-legal violence against them. Additionally, this regime provides space for the construction of, within quote, an enemy within that it needs for this politics to thrive. The National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval, said as much while delivering the Sardar Patel Memorial Lecture organized by the All India Radio in October 2018. He stated that India needs a strong and decisive government for the next 10 years to achieve its political and strategic objectives, while warning of a threat to the nation from, within quote, forces more within than outside, who probably are bent upon eroding the will of the nation, quote closed. This situation is further characterized by the construction of a contradiction between the common people and elites, which is used to justify the imposition of repressive measures by the state. The RSS ideologue Ram Madhav, writing in praise of the mob, argues that for the first time in 70 years, India's rulers are in tune with the core ideology of India's people, who are to quote him, who are finally at ease with a government that looks and sounds familiar. This is the wider logic of the Hindu rights political project and the elite mass binary, which plays an important role in this process and in the inclusion and exclusion of people and how they control and resist the state. Things moved fast from 2019 after the re-election of the government, as the Prime Minister moved swiftly to reshape India's secular republic to match his vision of India as a Hindu-centric powerhouse. The majoritarian narrative rapidly found official expression in new laws and policies. The government pushed through a series of laws in quick succession, which had a direct impact on the constitutional commitment to the concept of equal treatment. The breathtaking advance of majoritarian politics was apparent in three major developments. The government began with the abrogation of Article 370 and 35A of the Constitution, which defined and protected the status of Jammu and Kashmir. In one stroke, the state ceased to exist and came under virtual military occupation, with all means of communication and normal day-to-day life disrupted. Even after 2 years, the situation is far from normal in the state, and the whole exercise is still widely regarded as a violation of the Constitution and its procedures. The second development related to the Supreme Court's verdict, which announced that the disputed land in Ayodhya would go to a government-monitored trust to build a Ram temple, and Muslims would receive a separate 5-acre plot of land in the city to build a mosque. The apex court thus ensured that a temple would be built on the land where the mosque once stood, which by the court's own admission was illegally demolished. The greater significance of the judgment, I would argue, lies in the tacit endorsement of majoritarian politics by the highest court. Assigning to the central government the task of setting up a Hindu religious trust to build a temple implies that it was the government's duty to cater to Hindu religious interests. The court ruling was a huge victory for the ruling party, which had made the construction of this temple a focal point of its political campaign. Political analysts take the view that this would not have been possible without the indulgence of the Supreme Court. The third development, with even greater far-reaching consequences, so to speak, are the changes in the citizenship provisions. Citizenship provisions in independent India avoided any communal or religious identification, adopting a birth-based rather than descent-based model. This has changed after the enactment of the Citizenship Amendment Act in 2019, which seeks to fast-track citizenship to non-Muslim minorities in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh by creating an exemption from the illegal migrants category for religious minorities in these three countries. But it does not offer the same exemption to refugees and immigrants who happen to be Muslim. Now, this amended law quickly occupied the center stage of Indian politics. And for the ruling party, however, it was the culmination of a long overdue project which envisioned India to be the natural abode for all Hindus. This was the project of making India a Hindu nation state, that is to say, a state driven largely and sometimes solely by the interests of the religious majority. Now, this vision clearly runs contrary to the inclusive idea of India, which had enshrined equal citizenship with no religious distinctions. But this has clearly changed. However, the CAA and the proposed implementation of the National Register for Citizens sparked off nationwide protest, galvanizing thousands of people in an unparalleled and unprecedented display of opposition against this new citizenship regime. This resistance, it's important to note, occurred despite a concerted effort to discourage people, to prevent people from raising inconvenient questions or protesting against the ideological and political agenda of the regime embodied in the amended citizenship laws. Now, this mobilization against CAA on constitutional grounds was quite remarkable, but it also showed the involvement of the state in this project, in the sense that now it was clear that the state was the key player in pushing the majoritarian agenda, as evident from the very harsh police action, especially in Uttar Pradesh, where protesters were pitted against the police, which gave the CAA supporters a free rein to target them. At a political level, then, these three events challenged the core foundations of the Indian Republic, advancing the discourse of a redefinition of the state and nation in opposition to the secular definition enshrined in the Constitution. Hindu nationalists, on the other hand, saw religion as the strongest basis for a new national identity they were trying to craft. With an absolute majority in parliament, the regime seems confident that it can begin, and indeed it has begun, to operationalize this vision of a Hindu state. The method for advancing this project is clearly polarizing society on communal lines on the one hand, and on the other, seeking to combat dissent and shutting down anybody who raises inconvenient questions, even as these methods have generated more and more opposition. This government seems seriously averse to criticism and to protest. Now, while every previous government is guilty of similar abuses, make no mistake, the nature and scale of curbs are different, and as evidenced by the present dispensation's dismal record when it comes to the use of central agencies to rein in dissenting voices in political battles against the opposition and in favor of curtailment of freedom of expression. Any criticism of the government is fraught with danger for the average citizen not keen on spending time in police custody or jail, or having their premises raided by state agencies. As we know, so many committed human rights defenders and civil society activists who are countering the politics of hate and discrimination have often found themselves being harassed rather than being protected by law enforcement agencies. Now, besides this, the control of the media is by now so well known that it requires no recounting. Systematic efforts have been made to discipline the media through criminal defamation by using various regulatory agencies to target media houses and journalists. Other tactics include the advertising policy of the government, intimidation by income tax and enforcement directorate raids, and the concentration of media outlets in the hands of businessmen who need government support or are close to the government. The electronic media, less said about it, the better, is clearly dominated by pro-government channels that have, to use the words of Josie Joseph, sold out either because of ideological affinities or economic dependence. Corporate political control and nexus is a major reason why this is happening, but that alone cannot explain the shrill pro-government tone of many television channels and newspapers. The same corporate sector, after all, The same corporate sector controlled the same media 5 years ago. Then they were freely going after the previous United Progressive Alliance government, whereas now the media readily accepts the government line and in fact only interrogates the opposition. What is new then is that private capital or private control media has signed up to a project of aligning the media with the ideological purposes of the state. This is really what differentiates the media today from the media in the past. Now, targeting the minorities is, of course, an important element in this whole process. And clearly, Muslims have been the prime targets of violence and discrimination since 2014. Discrimination against Muslims has centered on the criminalization of triple talaq, discouraging interfaith marriages, love jihad, car protection operations, and the issue of beef and even meat itself. These campaigns also include measures against the meat industry, shutting out slaughterhouses and shops that allegedly do not conform to laws and regulations. That is not all. Several states have passed laws to ban religious conversion, which is in fact permissible so far under the Constitution. States have passed not just car protection laws, but also laws which empower vigilance to enforce car protection. In the past, such vigilance might have feared police reprisals or police action against their actions, so to speak. But this has not been the case since 2014. These groups are indeed protected by political leaders who are in a position to influence the government from within. And some of these actions have been spearheaded by the Bajrang Dal, especially those which pertain to vigilantism and cultural policing through physical threats and intimidation, often translating into violence and lynching of Muslims. Indeed, these groups have played a key part in advancing the ruling party's majoritarian agenda of making India a Hindu nation. Now, the Constitution, of course, guarantees equality and freedom of religion, but the structural discrimination faced historically by Muslims in economic and political representation and access to opportunities needs to be noted, especially as it has grown in the past few years. It is no secret that Muslims are the most underrepresented group in public institutions in India. Their representation in central and state government, armed forces, judiciary, police, and civil services is extremely low. They exist almost entirely outside India's formal economy, since most organized sector or even the unorganized businesses rarely hire Muslims, perpetuating economic exclusion regardless of their qualifications. Then, likewise, the institutional marginality of Muslims is perceptible. Now, they've been completely edged out of power structures. Their representation in the legislative arena has always been low, but it is even lower after the growth of majoritarianism. In fact, the BJP has clearly shown that over 200 million Muslims just don't count, and electoral majorities can be won without their support. Nowhere was this more evident than in India's weightiest state of Uttar Pradesh, where the BJP won a 3/4 majority in the 2017 assembly elections, essentially without Muslim support and without giving a ticket to even a single Muslim in a state where they constitute 20% of the population. In short, I think what has happened is that Muslims have been pushed out of the political system, first by rendering them irrelevant electorally, as in UP, and then rendering them invisible in the public sphere owing to their electoral inconsequentiality because they don't count in winning majorities. Now, this then brings me to the second part of my lecture, which is authoritarianism. The contemporary political order in India is fundamentally authoritarian and highly centralized, which has been very well documented and analyzed by James Maynard in a recent article. Centralization has grown immensely, as he has shown in the past 7 years. The common thread running through this process is authoritarian control of constitutional and regulatory institutions and an overall erosion of democratic norms. The drive for top-down control has targeted all public institutions, which are intended to serve as checks and balances on the unmitigated exercise of executive power, not the least investigative agencies. The state and its agencies, however, have been used to the fullest extent possible for dominating all the political power centers, including state governments, as much as is possible. According to Christophe Jawaharlal, the government has tried to prevail over the country's institutions, to quote him, either by constraining their power or by limiting their independence. This, he further points out, has been done through the appointment of people loyal to the regime, and in many cases, positions are filled, as he says, by trusted bureaucrats who have worked with the Prime Minister in Gujarat. Although institutions have always had to negotiate with political rulers, and there have been periods in India's past when things came to a flashpoint, as during the emergency, but never before constitutional institutions have had to function for political ends to this extent, where there's no formal declaration of emergency. This process began with the undermining of Parliament and the abandonment of any meaningful discussion and debate there. Between 2014 and 2019, Parliament was allowed to scrutinize just 26% of the bills, down from 60% and 71% in the two previous parliaments. This has been further reduced since May 2019. Passing bills without debate while ignoring the need for deliberation has clearly choked the parliamentary process. But the government doesn't seem to be particularly bothered because legislative business is carrying on amidst disruption and noise. The manner in which the farm bills, the very controversial 3 farm laws, were introduced and rushed through were rushed through, and the numerous bills that were passed in the last monsoon session without debate indicate a serious decline of Parliament. Now, the erosion of the Election Commission of India is part of the same story of exerting control over institutions. High-stake elections invariably throw up situations where the Election Commission of India doesn't just have to be fair, it has to appear to be fair and neutral. This position has been compromised by the erosion of the Election Commission's credibility owing to partisan decisions that are seen to be supportive of the ruling party, especially its top leadership. Critics point to the breaches of the model code of conduct that haven't been dealt with impartially and firmly, thus giving a fillip to the process of electoral majoritarianism. The government, for its part, limited the Election Commission's authority from within by appointing what critics call pliant election commissioners, a tactic that has affected other institutions also. The declining autonomy of this vital institution has unleveled the playing field and contributed hugely to distortions in electoral politics. If Parliament and the Election Commission is no longer an effective check on the executive, much the same can be said for the judiciary. The Supreme Court was until recently one of the most powerful courts in the world. But critics point out that it has abdicated some of its independence, notwithstanding its complete control over the formal processes by which appointments are made to the higher courts. The Supreme Court's role in the production of the National Register for Citizens in Assam, its judgment in the Ayodhya dispute, its apparent lack of urgency in hearing the challenges against the Citizenship Amendment Act, the abrogation of Article 317 in Jammu and Kashmir, and the unresolved, and this is really important, and the unresolved controversy of electoral bonds are seen as part of a pattern, as the court is simply avoiding pronouncing on controversial cases that strongly affect government interests. The court, for instance, has not taken up habeas corpus petitions. As a result, people are languishing in jail for months. During the term of 4 of its successive Chief Justices, critics point out the court stopped opposing the executive either by dismissing potentially embarrassing petitions or simply abstaining from taking up a case for months or years. Whether this can be explained in terms of government pressure or appointment of blind judges or ideological affinities on many issues, such as Ayodhya, Uniform Civil Code, and illegal migrants, remains an open question. The NRC issue is a striking example in which Chief Justices, or at least one Chief Justice, has expressed the same view as that of the ruling party. The fact that key institutions seem to have been captured by people who share, at least in part, the worldview of the Hindu right, in some cases are even connected to them, suggests the entrenchment of Hindu dominance, not outside the state, as might have been the case in the past, but they're now part of the state. That's the difference, and that's the departure. In the event, an authoritarian state may exert coercion more directly by distorting electoral competition, as in the case of electoral bonds, clearly, changing the laws, and using state agencies and its security apparatus to suppress and contain the opposition and to marginalize minorities. As a result, the previously level playing field can be sharply tilted to the advantage of those in power. In addition, the unequal access to financial resources at the expense of the opposition, biased media, and lack of impartiality among institutions of those in charge of organizing polls seriously limits political competition. And this in part accounts for the decline of the opposition, in addition to the fact that opposition disunity, factionalism, and their own ideological confusion is also responsible for their weaknesses. So authoritarianism then, as I've just argued, finds its greatest expression in neutralizing the opposition, but also any institutional power center. Intimidating and stifling the opposition is an avowed objective of authoritarian governments worldwide. This government has used the electoral mandate to dispense with consultation, even on issues of critical national importance. The ruling party has routinely denied the legitimacy of political opponents, most notably, of course, the Congress Party, as evident from the explicit objective of Congress Mukt Bharat or Congress Free India. This mission is, however, not anymore limited to getting rid of the Congress alone. It extends essentially to an opposition-free nation ruled by one party. Indeed, at its Bhubaneswar National Executive Meeting on 15th April 2017, the ruling party discussed the contours of an India without an opposition and opponents. This was an attempt clearly to do away with political plurality, which has been the singular strength of India, which would obviously weaken the foundations of democracy. During the first term of the National Democratic Alliance government, this idea found expression in the Speaker's refusal to grant the Congress the status of the leader of the opposition, which it still doesn't have. During the second term, it went further as it repeatedly dislodged opposition governments and Congress governments from power at the state level, even when it won elections. So the double-barrel weapons of neutralizing the opposition are engineering defections and, of course, investigation by central agencies, especially law enforcement agencies. Now, populists claim that they represent all the people, making political opposition not only redundant, but also illegitimate and even anti-national, to use Jan Werner Müller's argument with regard to populism. But of course, in India, we have more than a populist government. It's a kind of a nationalist populist government, or one might say, as I've argued, a nationalist communal populist government. Likewise, the ruling party in India seeks dominance by fighting against party-based opposition as much as against dissenting intellectuals, universities, independent journalists, NGOs, and so on. So it is not just parliamentary opposition that the ruling party has been targeting. It is opposition more generally, and opposition particularly from left-wing ideas and left-wing politics, which it considers not only illegitimate, but also illegal. In conclusion, then, this lecture, tracking India's journey from a pluralist to a majoritarian democracy, suggests three broad conclusions. First, based on the ideology of Hindu majoritarianism, three crucial decisions: the abrogation of Article 370 and the abolition of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, the Supreme Court verdict on the Ram Temple in Ayodhya, and the Citizenship Amendment Act have affirmed the discourse of Hindu hegemony over the state and the nation at the expense of secularism. This has polarized society and the electorate along ethno-religious lines. Consequently, minorities have been completely excluded from the institutional framework of the country. Second, the new political order, which is fundamentally authoritarian, which is essentially authoritarian, is defined by the limits it places on political pluralism through the use of state agencies to clip the wings of the opposition. It seeks to neutralize dissent, which was evident from the quashing of the anti-CAA protests and to a great extent the farm protests as well, and curtailing opposition parties in a bid to promote its dominance of the political system. Third, authoritarian control is neutralizing public institutions to facilitate a majoritarian takeover of the democratic apparatus and autonomous institutions. The control of the central government, exerts over key institutions has enabled the BJP to reshape the Indian state and democracy during its second term as the checks and balances intended to restrain executive power have been completely diluted. Furthermore, the polarization of the electoral process and the emasculation of institutions underscore the continuum between majoritarianism and authoritarianism. The close affinities between the two processes are evident, as I've tried to show, even as majoritarianism has prepared the ground for majoritarianism, which has weakened our democracy. It's clearly important to question these developments and mobilize in favor of equal rights and equity, not the least because of the rise of inequalities in India as the rich become richer and the poor have not benefited from the redistributive programs. In fact, mass poverty, inequality, and unemployment in particular have increased significantly, encouraging further the growth of a politics of hatred and repression as the only means of dealing with the economic crisis. This has acquired urgency as the BJP seeks to alter the very basis of politics to create a permanent majority reflecting social identity defined in ethnic and religious terms rather than taking up everyday issues that matter to the people. The biggest pushback by those who value India's democracy would be to consistently question these methods and those they vest with power and robustly debate the government's extremely flawed record. This trend can change as there is growing resistance to the authoritarian tendencies of the government and its policies. Several modes of resistance have gathered momentum outside traditional party politics in response to increasing polarization and to the far-reaching restructuring of our democracy, which has proceeded apace. Citizens have made use of various forms of political resistance and dissent. Major public protests, most notably the resistance against the Citizenship Amendment Act and against the world's longest and largest farmers' movement, has clearly put the government on the back foot. Even if protests and dissent do not have an immediate electoral impact, they do open the door for a gradual erosion of authoritarianism. Thank you very much.
May I request Professor Tanika Sarkar to give her chair's comments after this very fascinating session?
Yeah. So it's a privilege to be here. And thank you, Dr. Engineer, and the other organizers for that. This was a most fitting tribute to the great scholar activist, the secularist educator, Asghar Ali Engineer. And I congratulate Professor Hasan for that. Over the years, I have learned so much from reading her work and from listening to her discourses on current Indian politics. And this evening was no exception. Let me start by saying I agree emphatically and entirely with everything she had said. And I'm really struck by the remarkable comprehensiveness of the wide-ranging points that she raised and through which she delineated the kind of crisis we are facing today with everything she said about the crisis. The points she raised are many, and one can't possibly say anything serially about them. I won't even try. They are of critical importance just now. As we all know, a recent Swedish survey has said that among all the world democracies, Indian democracy faces the maximal threat. It's eroding the fastest. So we need to start counting, as Professor Hasan has done, what is already lost institutionally as well as normatively. And you all heard her. I don't have the time to enumerate them all over again. what remains really if checks and balances disappear largely, if majoritarianism, which is totally inimical to democracy, the very spirit of democracy, if authoritarianism intensifies, stifling dissent of all sorts from political parties, but I would say most of all from individual activists, human rights activists, NGOs, and relatively small groups who are, so many of them are behind bars for who knows how long. What remains of democracy? Without these foundational pillars, can a polity remain a democracy except in name? And as Professor Hasan very rightly pointed out, the freedom to vote alone cannot ensure the survival of democracy. And that's all we seem to be left with right now. I agree with her that there are always resources for resistance, and sometimes they take our breath away, like the anti-CAA protests, which simply exploded over the Indian political horizon. And I, for one, didn't expect anything like that to happen under this dispensation. They were smashed, by pandemic and by repression, but still they happened and they may happen again. But right now, and there's a little bit of difference, I'm more of a pessimist than she is. I think right now they don't seem to be on the horizon. So as a result, because we have the freedom to vote still, we are totally preoccupied with each and every state election and with the prospects for 2024, which are, of course, of paramount importance. But we sometimes forget to look at the larger picture, which she has laid out so clearly. This preoccupation may obscure our understanding of the overall malady that faces us. So what we have on one hand, and Professor Hasan also, I agree again with her, she has pointed out the weakening powers of the opposition parties. The center so determinedly goes against them. Congress above all, CPM in Tripura, the West Bengal elections, the mounting assaults on Kerala government, it will grow they will grow before the next election, so on and so forth. So what, on one hand, a majoritarian authoritarianism at the level of the central government, on the other hand, a block of regional parties which may capture power again and again at state level, but which, as of now, seem incapable of constituting a national level alternative to BJP, or even challenging it seriously beyond largely the gestures and rhetorics of oppositional politics, I would say. We do have mass movements still, and the farmers' movement is again something amazing. But we need more to actually fundamentally change the situation, because, okay. So I would, while agreeing with all that she has said, I'd look briefly at the other side and ask, how did we get here? And here I have a difference with her argument that Indian democracy was healthy before 2014. The erosion of democratic values and institutions therefore seems to lie with the entry of Hindu rights, majoritarian politics, and its electoral successes. But why were the electoral successes? How were the electoral successes possible? After Modi's record in Gujarat in 2002, after Gujarat's human and social indices records, after BJP governance failures at various states and at the central level between 1998 and 2004, how did they get here? And more than that, how did they get here in 2000? Sorry? Sorry?
So please go ahead. It is somebody mic is on. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Please carry on.
Okay. So how did they get here again in 2019? When, you know, the course of 2014-19 were so evident. Isn't the that begs the question, isn't the fundamental condition for a healthy democracy is a democratically minded electorate, which is alert to the dangers that face itself? If the electorate freely elects a majoritarian, authoritarian politics by huge margins twice over, if it does so, moreover, despite the many and glaring failings of governance, if it remains largely unmoved by the violence done to Muslims, horrendous violence, I would say monstrous violence, that goes on and on and on, that goes on to such an extent that it's becoming normal, you know. We no longer react to it as intensely as we used to do 5 years back. Against Muslims, Dalits, and women, against human rights activists, then is it an electorate that ensures democratic well-being? Where do our resources for hope lie? Even after the catastrophic consequences of a totally unnecessary demonetization, even after the gross mishandling of the pandemic, Modi's popularity ratings remain higher than most world leaders. And how is this possible? That should give us pause. It seems that we as a people are unable or unwilling to imagine a different leadership, far less act seriously to achieve it. We are unable to comprehend a different kind of democracy. We are reconciled to the present. I would also not see the weakness of the opposition entirely as a result of BJP's authoritarianism. Certainly it plays a very huge role, as Professor Hasan indicated, outlined. It's true, especially that every move the Congress has made, oppositional or even non-oppositional, even the Congress's efforts to provide help to affected people during pandemic were systematically blocked. And it was, I find this extraordinary. Everything that the opposition does is branded as playing politics. Now, what are political parties supposed to do except do politics? I mean, this is a contradiction in terms. Otherwise, they have to shut up shop.
But which is what they want.
Which is what they want. But surely they had started, I think, unraveling earlier without the BJP's or before the BJP's massive interventions. Sudipto Kaviraj, as we know, makes a distinction between democratization, which he says is quite advanced in India, and ironically, Modi's personal victory is perhaps a symptom of that, because he is our first OBC PM, rising from relatively subaltern ranks, though his early entry into the RSS is the path to a spectacular rise for him, a surefire route to upward mobility. But that, as Kaviraj says, may be different from democratic values, norms, and institutions, which did not probably strike so as many deep or strong roots in the Indian political and popular psyche as they should have. The unchecked power of the executive, therefore, does not face the kinds of challenges from opposition parties and from people in general. And I'm leaving out a huge section here, the section that risked all during the anti-CAA agitations, which risks all during riot relief, which risks all during investigations of riots. I'm leaving them out, but by and large, we have become indifferent to what's going on. And maybe the flaw lies partly, at least, with the opposition from centrist to leftist to regional ones. They failed to run a sustained and convincing popular education campaign on what constitutes democracy, what constitutes secularism, what is our constitution all about, Why are these values essential for our survival as a people, as a nation, as a democracy? They did not run a campaign analogous to or comparable to the extremely violent, determined campaign that the RSS had run to remold popular psyche to a large extent. They did not develop an apparatus for ideological remolding of the people, which could have shifted the terrain from hard right to left, or at least towards the center, which would also have been a great achievement. Opposition unity becomes an ever-receding dream, even at a time when the central government is caught on the back foot for once, as Professor Hasan said. Modi's ratings are still very high, but they are going down considerably. The courts and judges are reacting to what's going on pretty sharply. But the internal squabblings among the opposition parties have become loud and clear at this precise moment. And they are seem to be more focused against one another than against the BJP, even at this relatively opportune moment. And that's, I don't know where this comes from. Now, as Professor Hasan was said, the agenda of the Hindu right had always been clear: Hindu Rashtra. And for 100 years almost, it's been clear. They never backtracked on that. They have been explicit. They have even been frank and honest. That is their ultimate aim. Barring the UCC, again, they have gained everything that they have achieved everything that they have promised, from Kashmir to the Ram Mandir to, branding every criticism of every government policy as sedition, as anti-national, and so on. If other parties had a radically different agenda, surely they had, what were they doing? They had a long run for their money, but it seems that they were remarkably careless about their agenda. The Congress ruled for decades and decades. And for several decades, the left, after all, was the major parties in opposition, outstripping the BJP. We need perhaps to see what went on there too, to assess all that is going awry with our democracy, while the focus has to be, as Professor Hasan made it amply clear, the focus has to be the BJP, has to be Hindu Rashtra. We cannot stop for a moment exposing what they are about, but we have to also explore ourselves and criticize ourselves and ponder on how we let this happen to the country that we love so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tanika Sarkar. I will now call upon Professor Kamla Ganesh to moderate the question and answer section. I'm sure everyone has a lot of questions, and there are all kind of congratulatory messages pouring, and also I'm sure they'll have a lot of questions they will raise. Professor Kamla Ganesh, she is currently the Professor M.N. Srinivas Chair Professor at the Institute for Social and Economic Change, Bangalore. She was formerly the professor and head of so she writes a lot and researches on areas of gender, kinship, culture, and diversity. With this, may I please invite Professor Kamla Ganesh to please moderate the session.
Yeah, thank you very much, Neha. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so we've had
and anyone who has questions can please write them in the chat box, please.
or even they could also raise their hands and speak. But first, that was two very wide-ranging and both very incisive. One a long and comprehensive lecture, the other one a shorter one, but I think both of them have already raised a lot of comments. We have plenty of comments in the chat box about the very concise and articulate and comprehensive way in which
You are not asked.
Hasan
Yeah, I
has-
know.
There is some disturbance. There is some, yeah. So there are plenty of such comments, but there are only one or two questions as far as I can make out in the chat box now. One is from somebody called S. Sen, who has made fairly detailed comments and questions. So may I start by asking him to orally just summarize what he has said and, pose it as a question. Questions can be put to both Professor Hasan and Professor Tanika Sarkar. And if you don't ask it, I will also check out in the chat box. And Neha, we can have what, about 15-20 minutes of discussion?
We have 15 minutes. 15 minutes, 10 to 15
Okay, so
minutes.
I think about 4 or 5 questions, and then let's take it on from there. Who would like to start? Maybe Mr. or Miss Sen?
Yeah, this is Sen here. Could I intervene at this point?
Yes, please, but make it sharp questions.
Yeah. The point is that it was, of course, a very brilliant presentation, compellingly argued, very solidly substantiated. The most important of it all is this: it has made out in very precise details that the Indian state that was brought into being on 15th August 1947 is being radically reshaped. The process is on. Actually, Professor Sarkar has said that the right has achieved whatever they wanted to, except for UCC. I personally absolutely don't agree. Actually, there is a lot more to achieve, and that is the complete imposition of a complete authoritarian state, when even this webinar would be impossible. Any comments?
So would you like to take that, Professor Hasan?
Sorry, so what is the question, that we have still not traveled the whole distance?
Yeah, we will be approaching a situation where even today's webinar would not be possible. Any comment on that? That's my point.
Let's hope not. I mean, the fact that we can have such a webinar, and I'm sure there are many others as well, suggests that, well, it in a way speaks to the difficulties of imposing a completely authoritarian system in India. Because for a start, India is very large, it is very diverse, and also its politics, with all the effort to control it, cannot be fully controlled, because after all, we do have opposition governments in different states. So I think India is its sheer size, its diversity, its history, and also to some extent the fact that we've had almost 75 years of democracy. And all said and done, unlike I think what Tanika was suggesting, although I agree with most of her comments, I do think that somewhere democracy has struck roots, and which is why there has been, even in the last 7 years, no dearth of opposition, not even in a state like UP, which is being run in the way in which it is being run. And yet there is really no shortage of opposition. So I think in that sense, it does speak. It does speak to, in a sense, the penetration of democracy in our society. Now, of course, there are limitations, as Tanika pointed out, that why are we where we are? We are where we are because of obvious weaknesses. But nonetheless, I think the good news is that I think democracy counts for something, and people do enjoy differences of opinion. People enjoy dissent, and as Amartya Sen famously said, we are argumentative people, and to that extent, and I think that's good news for democracy.
May I just add something a little bit?
Yes.
Yes, I agree with Zoya too about that. And as I said, getting very despondent when the anti-CA protests burst upon us. And that shows that there are always these resources somewhere. But in response to your question, I would say that, yes, it can get much worse, and it will probably get much worse. But I was saying what they had said they had achieved. They did not promise authoritarianism, though that was implicit. They did not put it on their agenda, so to speak. What they put on their agenda, they have achieved, barring one. That was my point.
There is a question from...
Can I ask a question? This is Vijay Naik here.
No, 1 minute. There is already a question on the chat box from Vijay Kumar, who says, why is everything that is done by the Sangh Parivar termed Hindu and thereby endorsing their claim to represent Hinduism or the Hindus? Maybe we could take that before we go to the next one.
I think maybe Tanika might want to take that.
No, we don't, if you want me to, Zoya, but you...
Please.
No, but we don't say Hindu, we say Hindutva. And there is a radical difference which they try to erase. You know, when we say Hindutva, they always say Hindu. And in the US right now, there was this dismantling Hindutva seminar, which they interpreted as dismantling Hinduism. And there was, you know, all hell broke out over that. Hindutva is a term that Sarkar popularized almost 100 years back, 1923. And he began by making a qualitative distinction between Hindutva as the national essence, as a political ideology, and Hinduism as religion. So Hindutva has nothing to do with religion. It has everything to do with defining the nation as a nation predominantly of Hindu people, and those who are not Hindu were Hindu at some distant origin, and they better acknowledge it. Otherwise, we should consider them as outside the national fabric and a danger to the national fabric. So he made a distinction between Hindutva and Hinduism, but it was not a very radical distinction because he still referred to the Hindu community as the real nation. We never say Hindu, we say Hindutva always.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please. Yes.
This is Vijay Naik from IIT Bombay. I have a question to Professor Hasan. I understand your position is that the ideological purpose of the BJP project is to create a state which is governed for the benefit of religious majority. I personally feel that is not the purpose of the BJP project. In fact, the purpose is to use polarization to achieve a different objective, which is to create a Brahminical state in which the benefits are according to birthrights and birth-based negations and inhibitions to the non-Brahminical majority. And all the entire politics, even the politics regarding Muslims, is governed by this, because most of the Muslims, except for a few, a small proportion, happen to be the erstwhile Dalits and Bahujans of this country who rebelled against the Brahminical intolerance, and they became the Muslims. So when there is a policy regarding beef and cow, in fact, the most affected are the Dalits, because they actually are outnumbering the Muslims and who used to eat the beef. So the educational policy, it is in fact a policy which is creating a Dvivarna education system. So if you look at the entire underpinning thrust, it is to not to create a state which is for the benefit of the majority Hindu, but it is really only the divisive agenda is to establish the supremacy of a Brahminical ideology in this country. So I don't know what is your...
Can we put it to the speakers?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Naik.
Well, I think, I mean, you may have a point that certainly the Brahmanical dimension is important, but my own view, for whatever it is worth, though obviously you are probably a greater expert on the subject, is that I think things have gone. I mean, it is one thing to say that their main purpose is to establish Brahmanical hegemony. Of course, that is there, but I think things have gone beyond that. It's not just about Brahmanism anymore, as I understand it, and it would be hard to explain the kind of political support and social support that they have built if it was only about Brahmins benefiting from it. Now, they are benefiting more from it, certainly, but it is not. It would not be fair to suggest that others have not benefited from it. So I think while there is a point, I mean, your overall argument about the importance of caste and looking at it in terms of the caste dimension as far as the Hindutva hegemony is concerned. I mean, there is a point, but I think it's a much larger project, and it's a project which is not limited to Brahmanical dominance, although they may be the greatest beneficiaries of it, and indeed they are. I mean, if we go by what has happened in the past few years, certainly they've been able to come back to power and regain power with a vengeance after the Mandal interregnum, so to speak, no doubt. But on the other hand, there is a Mandalization of BJP as well. So, I mean, so these two processes are going hand in hand. There's Brahmanization, but there's also Mandalization of BJP. And as to your point about that even among Muslims only, the point that you were making, that it is really it's again the same caste point, that there are distinctions among Muslims, yes, of course. But I think there too, I might submit that their opposition is much broader. It is against Muslims per se. That is what defines, in my view, that is what defines their politics, and that is what distinguishes them from anything else. So in a sense, it is about Hindutva, but in a very important sense, it is basically anti-Muslimism. That's what it is, frankly, about.
Would Professor Sarkar also comment on this particular point raised by Mr. Naik?
Tanika, she's asking you.
I think that to establish or, to retain caste, that is very important and very central and crucial to them. And, the RSS emerged at a point precisely at a point when quote unquote low caste protests were gaining body and volume. And there was a need to overcome it and to invent and manufacture an enemy figure outside the Hindu body. But I do think, and I completely agree with Zoya, that the anti-Muslim agenda has a very vibrant and very powerful life of its own. And without that, the BJP would be nowhere, because the Dalits are the unnameable enemy, let's put it like that. They can't name them as the enemy. The Muslims are named explicitly, targeted explicitly as Muslims because they are Muslims. And that resounds in my mind when Afrazul Islam was killed by Rehgar in Rajasthan, a complete stranger, to Rehgar. He was hacked into pieces. And when the villagers who endorsed it exuberantly, Harshmander asked them, why did you kill a man who had done you no harm, whom you didn't even know? They said in one voice, because he was a Muslim. So we cannot ignore it as just a mask or extraneous.
Any other questions? There is one here, maybe I'll read that out. Abbas, intellectuals understand the intricacies, but sadly, most of them shy away from the issues and the masses are still ignorant. Question is, how do we educate them?
Well, it's a good question, and I'm not sure if I have the answer, even though I've been a teacher for over 4 decades. And I suppose it is, in a sense, a comment on our failures, so to speak, that with such extensive teaching experience, we have still not succeeded. But on the other hand, I think, what the gentleman is talking about is mass education, which is obviously different from the education that Tanika and I are in. But surely the education that we are in, higher education, should have had that spillover effect. So yes, mass education is important, but I'm not sure whether that you're right in suggesting that intellectuals have not been able to do it, and they alone, that maybe is not even their central concern, is not mass education. There, I think the point that Tanika was making is an important one, which is to say the failure of the opposition in failure of the opposition in bringing out or mobilizing people and bringing in political awareness, political consciousness, and so on. But I think it has so much to do with the nature of our society. While we can blame the opposition parties for what they are, but at the same time, ours is such a complex society and such a complex culture that it's no easy task to really do the kind of mass education that is required. And the divisions in our society are so huge and so monumental that it's not easy. It's not easy, really, combined with mass poverty. So it's altogether a difficult situation.
Anybody else, please? Any other questions? There are no other questions. The role of RSS has not been taken up in the presentations.
That is correct. And we have an RSS expert here.
Not really, no. No.
Tanika is the expert on the subject.
Not at all.
I am certainly not one. So perhaps Tanika might briefly intervene on this.
Next lecture, maybe.
We certainly.
Well, I was supposed
strongly
to
recommend that.
Zoya's lecture, not to present an independent lecture. So,
okay.
Yes. Well, if there are no more questions, then I hand over to Neha to wind up. Neha. Irfan, what is the next?
Neha? All right.
Yeah. Sorry, there is a bit of a connection issue. Yeah, I think we will have to call it a day with the question answers. And can I please invite Advocate Irfan Engineer, the Director of CSSS, to propose a vote of thanks after this very fascinating and wonderful evening that we have had.
Before I do so, there are questions, but we will not take these questions for answering as time is up. But I would like to acknowledge that there are 35 comments on Facebook Live, and there are more than 50 people who saw this lecture on Facebook. Zinat Khan has asked, of course, we are not seeking answers right now. As a student she writes, Zinat Khan, as a student, that too a minority one, how can I counter on an individual level the rising communal hatred and weakening of democracy in our country? Zinat, we could have a talk separately on that, or you could write to us, we will respond. Arwa Kapasi writes, I work on the ground, at the grassroots level. Through my NGO, and I have experienced that a large number of Muslim population is illiterate and still unaware and unable to understand the rights and the stand for their right as an Indian constitution. How can we create an awareness in this general minority population? Again, I would say we can have a conversation, Arwa, and we should connect on this, and we should work together. I would have liked today's resource persons, and particularly Professor Zoya Hasan, to reply to these questions as well. But lack of time prevents us. There are about 92 sharing in different groups on the Facebook Live. So there, I mean, I think it was a very good response that we had. Amit Rai writes on Facebook that maybe this could have been even more publicized. We reached a maximum of 100. That was the maximum capacity. Probably many were waiting outside the room because the capacity was over. I thank Professor Zoya Hasan immensely for such an excellent lecture. You analyzed the present situation and also gave us hope and direction, where to work and where to go. It was very good coordinating with you. Thank you so much for agreeing to deliver this lecture and delivering such a lucid lecture. I would also like to thank Professor Tanika Sarkar. She very readily agreed to chair this, and her comments were also very, very perceptive and added to the whole. And I think we have a lot of appreciation, a lot of comments and appreciation both on Facebook as well as on in the chat box. So thank you all. We did not only have eminent person speaking as resource person and chairing, we had very eminent audience as well. So I would like to thank Professor Irfan Habib, who was here, Dinbandhu Manchala from US, Ian Talbot was here, or perhaps is here, I'm not very sure. Ila Bhatt, Professor Prabhat Patnaik was here, Dr. Binayak Sen was here, Professor Suranjan Das, and many, many eminent persons were here. And all over 100 participants and all, even those who could not join because we had reached our maximum capacity. I thank the audience immensely for always being our support and encouraging us. I thank Professor Ram Punyani, who always encourages us and supports us to undertake these lectures. I thank Dr. Vinod Mobai, a great source of encouragement, support, inspiration to us, and we can carry on thanks to his support and encouragement. He's always, Professor Wajat Habibullah was here. I thank Professor Nasreen Fazal Boy, Professor Kamla Ganesh, and all others, and the CSS team, Ishan, Bhakti, Neha, all of them actually supported us immensely and very well. Thank you all for being here. What a wonderful evening it was. And we will be publishing this lecture in our journal, Indian Journal of Secularism. And this will be available also on the Facebook. And we will keep sharing this in other groups. And I'm sure over a period of time, there'll be thousands of people who will be viewing this lecture. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Ma'am, you are muted.
Thank you. Thank you.